So Charlie writes, does the fact that the Canon R10 has no headphone jack bother you? Short answer is no. More on that later. I'm thinking of trading my 90D for an R7 or an R10. I have an full frame already. I need a second camera. An R7 is $800 more, dual slots, IBIS, and the bigger batteries to me are the big differences. Though, is it worth $800? Personally, if I were creating a multicam setup, that's going to do long form video recording. I would hope to have dual card slots. I would hope to have good enough batteries. The IBIS is a hit or miss because if it's going to be on sticks for the most part, like on a tripod, then it doesn't really matter. But if I'm going to be running around with it, and I have lenses that I compare with it with relation to image stabilization, then yeah, I think the IBIS would definitely come in clutch for those reasons. But at the same time, if I'm going super ultra wide, something like a Tokina 11-16 or anything in that range, or a full frame equivalent of anything that's 24 millimeters or wider, then I would go for gyro stabilization, taking that extra step to pair with something like an Insta360 or a GoPro, and then mash that footage in Gyroflow and stabilize. But you'd have to make sure your shutter speed is where it's at. First, let me talk about the headphone thing. The reason why not having a headphone jack is not that big a deal on the camera itself is because I typically almost always record my audio off the camera. So for example, this is my go-to boom mic that I will typically take with me for any kind of run and gun stuff. The only time the headphone is important is just for me to make sure that I'm getting levels. You see those levels going up and down? This has a headphone out. So if I need to monitor the audio, or if my boom guy needs to monitor the audio, they will be able to do so right from here. This is being used in a run and gun scenario, either recording jiu-jitsu matches or we're holding a seminar.
I'm going to that side. Grab the wrist, bring my knee inside. And again here, elevate his hand and start skip. One squeeze.
And we're taking Q&A from our audience members. So this will be on a boom pole, and whoever is the grip for it will basically turn the pole over right above the audience member's head to be able to catch that audio. So this is the Tascam DR10L. The upside is both of these have headphone out, and also internally I can record 24-bit audio, and it will also record a secondary backup audio that is 6 decibels quieter. So this way, if there's anything that's peaking, I don't have to worry about it. I can always recover the audio from the slightly lower. They also came out with a pro version of the DR10L, which does 32-bit float audio, which is essentially raw audio. You don't have to worry about peaking and things like that. You can just recover everything. So that's a perk of this. That's why it doesn't really matter to me if the camera itself doesn't have a headphone out, unless the context and the use of the camera is that I have the microphone mounted on the camera and I'm recording. Everything I'm capturing is going to be on the camera. Then it would be a good idea for me to have some sort of microphone or headphone out from the device that I'm using. So, but because of the fact that the audio and video, in my case, tend to be so far apart in terms of physical proximity, I tend to not have to worry about that. But going back to your value question of, is it worth $800 for dual slots, IBIS, and bigger batteries? So the upside of the R7 also is that it has a higher resolution sensor. It has a 32 megapixel sensor versus the 26 or 24 megapixel sensor of the R10. So that's also one of the major differences. Now, if you're talking about recording video, there's also a difference there. Now, both cameras, if I am not mistaken, can do 4K 60 frames per second, but the 4K 60 in the R10, if I'm not mistaken, is cropped. The R7, from what I understand, gives you two different options for 4K 60. One option is the cropped 4K 60, which gives you a very clean image. And then the other is a full sensor 4K 60, but it does line skipping. So because you're dealing with a 7K image, or approximately 7K, which is what 32 megapixel comes out to be, and it'll do every other line. And so it comes out to be about 3.5K, which then is up-resed. to 4K. It's essentially what the Canon M6 Mark II already does. All the standard video modes in the Canon M6 Mark II are essentially, because it's a 32 megapixel sensor. The 90D also, if I'm not mistaken, is a 32 megapixel sensor. So when you're recording 4K, instead of downsampling it, meaning taking that 7K image and squeezing it down to 4K, what it's doing is, again, it's taking every other line. You get about 3.5K, and then it expands that to about 4K. So you get a slightly softer 4K. Now, on its own, you would have never noticed that there's an up-resing, especially if you're watching it on a mobile device of sort. But if you're watching it on TV and you put it side by side, or you're trying to cut it with footage that is genuinely downsampled 4K, you will notice that that's in 4K 60 specifically, in the full sensor coverage between the two cameras. Again, if this is from what I understand, I may be wrong, fact check me on this one. So I just wanted to add that as a bit with relation to being able to weigh the value of choosing an R7 versus an R10. Dual slots is important for me with relation to being used in the context of long form recording. So if I'm doing like, sometimes I'll get with a client, we're going to record like 50 videos. All right, so I work with several YouTube channels for clients. I work in adult education. And so one of the things that we'll do is once a quarter, we'll get together, multi-camera shoot, answer a bunch of questions, record a bunch of content. We'll record for 2 or 3 days straight. And that basically sets us up for the content schedule for the next 3 to 6 months. So in that situation, having a backup is really important. Ironically, the only camera that I use that has dual card slots in that setup is my GH5. But it's important to me that at least one of my cameras have those dual card slots, because I'm recording with 4 cameras. And I've had situations where something went wrong with the footage in one of the cameras. I still had 2 or 3 additional cameras to serve as footage and angles that I could use, so that way nothing was interrupted. Now, the upside of having dual card slots as your only solo camera is that you can dual record, if I'm not mistaken, or one of the things that has been helpful for me is the second context in which I use a lot of this material is seminar recording. Now, when it comes to seminar recording, when one card fills up, it'll automatically, if I'm not mistaken, I think the R6 Mark II and the R7 might have that option. I know some of the Sony cameras have that option, where it'll automatically start rolling into the next footage. If not, you can just press record and it'll start recording on the second card slot that's already full. And so once it starts recording on the second card slot, you can pull the first card slot out and start transferring and organizing your footage. In a seminar setting where we're recording several days at a time all day, having that flow, having the ability to transfer and not interrupt and pause the instruction is extremely valuable. In fact, it is a non-negotiable in that setting. And so that's something that's helpful. Now, with relation to in another situation where having dual card slots is very helpful, and this is something that I do feel many times when I'm out traveling, right? I'm going to a different city, visiting family, friends, or even work, and I have my camera with me. If I have a single card slot camera, then I will fill that up. And it's one of those things where if I have 2 card slots, I never have to take the cards out of the camera, except to transfer the footage later. But those are the 2 cards I'm running with. This is for when I'm traveling and I'm on vacation or visiting or anything like that. That's something that has that I experienced with both the GH5 and the R6 Mark II. That I found that to be very valuable. Now, the bigger batteries, absolutely, especially when comparing. And again, I'm comparing my experience with relation to something like a ZV-E10, the R10. When traveling with the R10, I have had to travel with 3 of those LPE17 or LPE12. I'm not sure what the actual number or name of the battery is, but I have to have at least 3 of those, especially even with the Canon R8. I had to have like 3 or 4 of those with me so I can get through the day, regardless of, just with my type of use. With the GH5, I could go all day with the same battery. Now, granted, continuous recording on a GH5, that battery would last me about 3 hours almost. Same thing with the Z-rated batteries on the Sony, like the A7C or the FX30 or the FX3. Those same Z-rated Z batteries, NP, I don't know what, I think they call it the Z battery. It'll last about 2.5 or 3 hours. Same thing with the R6 Mark II and the R7. If I'm not mistaken, they both take the same battery. And I'll tell you right now, man, having one, maybe two batteries, or having two batteries is more than enough. It'll last you the whole day. I doubt you're going to be continuously shooting for 5 or 6 hours, right? Especially if you're doing that. And if you are going to be shooting for 5 or 6 hours, 2 batteries is probably going to get you through it. Now, if you're going to be doing a seminar or you're going to be continuously rolling, or you're going to be doing a shoot for several days for like YouTube or social media, things like that, then getting yourself a 99 watt hour V-mount battery would probably be ideal. And that's what I've done for just for these seminars and stuff. If not that, then I'm connected to a wall outlet, to a dummy battery. But if you're on the go, you want to be mobile, and you don't want your stuff to be interrupted, then yeah, having bigger battery is everything. Now, the IBIS, this is a tricky one, and the reason I say this is because it's a situation in which you're going to be using IBIS, right? So I found a lot of value in IBIS, specifically in the context of both the GH5 and the R6 Mark II. The IBIS was useful because it saved me work in post-processing. It allowed me to also drop my shutter speed down. So this way I can record in lower light settings, something like a wedding, or even at home indoors. The IBIS definitely allows you to do that in both photos and videos. Now you pair that with a compatible lens, like at least on the Canon, having IBIS with something like a 70-300 f4 to 5.6 LIS lens, or in this case, if you're going to be using an RF mount lens, I think almost all the zooms, if I'm not mistaken, have IS, right? Everything from except for like the 28 to 70 f2, but the 24 to 70 f2.8, the 70 to 200 f4 and f2.8, the 15 to 35 f2.8, 14 to 35 f4. All of these lenses, they have IS built into it. Pair that with the IBIS of the camera, and also turn on digital IS, like you're good. Like this is like you got triple IS. Your shots are gonna be smooth. You don't even need a gimbal, not unless you plan on running around like a crack addict, or if a dinosaur is chasing you. But other than that, like that's one of the major values. Now, in the situation that you don't have IBIS, or where the IBIS might prove to be bothersome, is when you're dealing with focal lengths that are super ultra wide. So in the context of crop sensor cameras, if you're dealing with a focal length of something like anything at and wider than 16 millimeters, right? So 16 millimeters on a crop sensor would probably be the limit. And the reason is because at that focal length and wider, the lens, the IBIS itself will result in some sort of wobble on the edges. This is the case with the GH5. If you go super ultra wide, you will see wobble, and especially with full frame cameras like the R5 and the R6 Mark II, you will definitely see it. Anything wider than 24 millimeters, because it's 16 millimeter on a crop sensor, will be equivalent to the field of view of a 24 millimeter on a full frame lens. So I know on my GH5, if I'm at 12 millimeters or wider, then I can notice the wobble. And so, especially if I have a focal reducer or a speed booster attached between the lens and the camera to give me a wider field of view, then that wobble becomes very apparent. So on something like an R7, on the R7, if you get like an ultra wide lens, and I'm trying to think, is there any ultra wide lens? But on an R7 without any kind of speed booster, like going straight native, anything wider than 16 millimeters, you just need to be wary of the fact that you're going to get some wobble. Now, how do you mitigate that? How do you avoid that? What I do is if I'm going to be shooting anything wider than that, I consider two options. Option number one is a gimbal, which is not practical in most situations. And the reason is because it's too big, right? This is like having a gimbal is not necessarily something that's easy to pack, unless it's something like this. This is like a Hohem MT2 or M6, whatever. It's made for a cell phone, right? Or a GoPro or an Insta360, right? This is small enough to pack, right? I got a little Zhiyun quick release thing. Pull that out and throw this in my bag. Not a big deal. This one got the AI thing going on it. It's okay. Might do a review for that later. Yeah, so gimbal is an option, but if you don't have a gimbal or it's impractical for you to use a gimbal, then the second option is to use something like Gyroflow. So one of the ways to do that is to mount a something that is able to record gyro data. So this here is an Insta360, and I basically got some NATO rails that through one of those 15 millimeter rod that I screwed onto the Insta360. So this way I have a direct field of view. So this actually serves as two angles if I want to. Now, in the case of Sony already records gyro data within the cameras themselves. And so I could just stabilize it digitally with Catalyst Browse, which definitely is very useful. So the upside is it doesn't matter what your focal length is unless you're too tight, right? So I have found anything at less than 200 millimeters, you'll be able to gyro stabilize without a problem. Even if it's ultra wide, in fact, that's how gyro stabilization works really well. The downside is that you have to ensure that your shutter speed is cranked up. And so we're looking at a 90, if not 45 degree shutter to eliminate any and all motion blur. So this way you can stabilize all your footage without it looking all muddy when the digital stabilization is taking place. Now, the Canon R10 nor the R7, or actually none of the Canon cameras that, as far as I know, as of right now, which is December 5th, 2023, they don't capture the gyro data into a metadata file within the video file of the camera that would then allow you to gyro stabilize. In the same, the cameras that do that are cameras from Sony. Almost all the Sony cameras post 2020, like A7C, the A60, ZV-E10, A6700, FX30, FX3, almost all the FX cameras. Also Blackmagic design, the full pocket 4K, 6K, 6K G2 Pro, the micro studio camera 4K, which just recently came out. They all record gyro data within the camera. So all you have to do is pull that footage into Gyroflow, pick your focal length, stabilize, and your footage is going to be super smooth. When it comes to stabilizing the footage through Gyroflow on, say, a Canon camera, the way you have to do it is to do something similar to this. Now, you don't have to do it like this, but you could even just do it through just mounting it off of the cold shoe, and it'll be on top of your camera as long as the movement of the camera body and the Insta360 that's capturing the gyro data is the same. been while we're landing now. This kid decides to knock out. Then all you have to do is pair the footage, and I have several videos on that. But that's basically the way that I would approach the stabilization of any footage that's going to be ultra wide angle, regardless of whether the camera has IBIS. Now, the key thing here is on the R7, that footage, that the IBIS would have to be turned off. So you have to disable the IBIS, and then you would be able to stabilize with the gyro data that you're capturing off of a secondary device. All of this worth $800. Only you can answer that. Kind of shared with you the value that I see. Personally, if I were creating a multicam setup, that's going to do long form video recording. I would hope to have dual card slots. I would hope to have good enough batteries. The IBIS is a hit or miss, because if it's going to be on sticks for the most part, like on a tripod, then it doesn't really matter. But if I'm going to be running around with it, then and I have lenses that I can pair with it with relation to image stabilization, then yeah, I think the IBIS would definitely come in clutch for those reasons. But at the same time, if I'm going super ultra wide, something like a Tokina 11-16 or anything in that range, or a full frame equivalent of anything that's 24 millimeters or wider, then I would go for gyro stabilization, taking that extra step to pair with something like an Insta360 or a GoPro, and then mash that footage in Gyroflow and stabilize. But you'd have to make sure your shutter speed is where it's at. So yeah, I hope that's helpful. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. I'll see you soon.